Hello and welcome to the Guitar Hang Podcast. I'm your host, John Stancorb. Today we have an incredible special guest, Stevie Salas, a true guitar legend whose work has spanned decades and crossed multiple genres. He's rocked the stage with some of the biggest names in music, including Mick Jagger, Rod Stewart, Was Not Was, and was the musical director for American Idol. Stevie worked with Justin Timberlake, George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic, Daughtry, and more. This man is not only a powerful guitarist, but also a creative force behind the scenes. His unique style and unmatched energy has made him one of the most sought-after guitarists in the industry. Please join me in welcoming the amazing Stevie Salas to the show.
Studio's called Orb. It's got part of your name in it. O-R-B.
Yeah, that's right. O-R-B.
It's kind of a famous studio here in Austin.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? Dave Grissom may have mentioned that about in passing.
Really?
Yeah.
Did he mention he was going to steal my job when I was a kid?
Yeah, you told me about it. He shows up at the Rod Stewart gig.
I remember I told you that. I was laughing. Yeah. I got to promise. I'm going to stick to answering your questions before I ramble off on madness.
Yeah. You know, the one thing I always try to keep it loose and not have, I don't want you to feel like, you know, this guy didn't do his homework and he's asking me the same questions that I answered a million times. I do have some things I'd like to get to, but in a very conversational way. And I think people will love to hear from you, even if my wife could enjoy what you have to say, because even if she's not a guitar player, the way you tell things is in a very storyteller-like thing where it's interesting if you've never played an instrument, you know, to hear about the different things that you've done. And I don't find many people that have done the diverse amount of things that you have. So with that in mind, if somebody was looking to, back in the day, audition for a Rod Stewart or Mick Jagger or something like that, you know, I don't think they could really fully appreciate what it would take to get the gig. You know, not only playing, but the hang and just the disposition and fitting in with the team thing, the vibe of the family thing, because a bus is a rolling microcosm. Well, in Mick's case and Rod Stewart, you may not have been on the bus. You might have been doing fly dates, but
no, you know, there's all that we had private planes with Rod Stewart and with Jag, we were flying around first class everywhere kind of thing. But it's not so much that, you know, I never really thought about it. Growing up in San Diego, I recently got this Lifetime Achievement Award in San Diego, and I was thinking about my life and my career, and growing up in San Diego had a lot to do with it because I grew up in a place called Oceanside where I had black friends, white friends, purple friends, green friends. I mean, it was just like you didn't see color. And me being a Native American, and my other buddy was, you know, my buddy Marcus on the wrestling team would turn me on to Parliament Funkadelic, and these guys are like the Kiss of black music. Little did I know, a few years later I'd be playing guitar with George Clinton and Bootsy Collins and those guys. But because of Marcus's exposure, the whole thing just all made sense to me. I was very, very into Brian Setzer and the Stray Cats. And when I moved to LA, I'm fan, became one of my best friends and still is to this day. And I loved rockabilly and I loved punk rock, because in San Diego, you know, you had your alternative stations. So the kids would be like, you surf. I surfed every day. And when you surf, you could surf easily to Ted Nugent, Hey Baby, or skateboard to that. But you could also skateboard or surf to Joe Jackson or Elvis Costello. And you kind of, you know, I was exposed to all that music. And so all of it made sense to me. So when I've had friends where you go up to, you know, a certain place in the world where they live and they know metal and that's it. And they can't understand, you know, and I grew up in a place where, you know, even Thin Lizzy and those people, they used more pure tones. Everybody had a Marshall, you know, a killer, an old school Marshall. And you had like either, you know, if you had the deluxe pickups, you could play a little bit thinner, like a little more punk rocky. And if you had the custom, you could have a little more heaviness, you know, and your Strat did one thing. And so I think San Diego is what made me diverse. I'll tell you something though, it was in the greatest compliments of my life. One of them is Jesse Dayton, who's a great guitar player, singer from here in Austin, Texas, called me one day and he goes, "Hey, I ran into Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick and they were doing this thing." And he says, "Did you call Stevie Salas? That guy can play with anybody and play anything." And I've only heard him say that myself about Jeff Beck. So I felt really like maybe in my old age, I've actually accomplished something, you know what I mean? So
Yeah. Yeah, that was that a Joel Danzig connection? Is that how he got to find out about you, or through another
No,
artist?
no. I met Rick and Cheap Trick through Sass Jordan.
Oh,
Sass
okay.
Jordan was a big star in Canada in the
Yeah.
early 90, 91. And I had just come out with Color Code. She heard my Color Code record and loved it. The guy who signed me, Steve Pross,
Yeah.
was her in America. And the next thing you know, Sass and I started dating. And she was opening and playing with Cheap Trick. And before that, she was dating Tom Peterson, or they were best friends, or there was some kind of
Oh,
something.
okay. Yeah.
And so we would go see Cheap Trick, and she was like their family, and they would always ask me to sit in with them,
Yeah.
which was, to me, was a dream. Anytime I get to sit in, having dinner with Eddie Van Halen or sitting in with Cheap Trick, all that kind of shit to me is still like.
Yeah.
So I got to know them that way, and then they loved the way I produced. So at one time, about the time I was doing the Sass Jordan Rats album, Rick would start showing up in the studio while I'd be working. And I was very close to producing a Cheap Trick album after they stopped working with Richie Zito, who was also my neighbor in the Hollywood Hills.
Yeah. And I didn't catch that last part. I'm sorry.
I almost ended up producing Cheap Trick.
Oh, God.
They were really close. They were talking with me a lot about it.
Oh, wow.
They had finished working with Richie Zito. They were going in a different direction.
Oh, my.
They
Okay.
this album I had produced, wrote all these songs and produced this record with Sass called Rats. And everybody like flipped for that record. And so I was gonna get to produce Cheap Trick, but I also had a recording contract, and I was finishing my Back from the Living album, and it just didn't never worked out. But we're still great friends, and I play with them all the time. Anytime I show up, I grab a guitar and play with those guys.
Yeah. And as far as producing artists, was that something that you learned from any other engineers or producers that kind of pulled you into that world? Because it's such a departure from playing your instrument, being able to have a arranger's ear and kind of casting a movie, in terms of what's going to be the best. Now, with a band, I know it's one thing, but if you're doing like a solo artist where you're having to bring in the players, I'm interested to find out how
Yeah.
you approach the producing
Well,
stand.
the producing thing, John, and also, I've been a music director for some huge, huge stuff. And MD is like the live band producer in a lot of
Yeah,
ways.
right.
But when I started to really produce was before I'd made it. I just told people I was a producer. I really didn't know. I'm not an engineer. I started to learn how to engineer, and I really thought that this sucks because now all I hear is a kick drum, and I'm no longer looking at the whole landscape of a song
Right.
and the direction. For me, it was not just a great song. He always had a great song, but I also looked for directions and little hooks that I thought this is what someone's like. I remember with Kiss, get the firehouse. The lick was cool, right? The lick was cool, but then Ace Frehley would go, and that little riff in the verse, and I'd be like, that just got my ear. So I started to think like that. And so when I produce, I would just say, I'm going to produce, because if I produce, I can try to play this weird guitar that I want to play. Because in LA, I got to LA in 85, January of 85. And I realized at that moment, I was never going to be as good as Eddie Van Halen. And I was never going to be, I had to find what could I be great at. And everybody was into this 80s rock thing, which I didn't really love. I liked some of it, but I really didn't love the whole thing. I just didn't love it. You know what I mean? I thought some of it was so corny. And, but some of it was great. Like I like Motley Crue, like I like Iggy Pop, I like the real guys, I didn't like, the Kicks and Trickster and Britney Fox and,
Yeah.
but I'd like Cinderella and Britney Fox was like, Cinderella was like, if Britney Fox had a mean brother and she was the corny sister that watched Barbie or something, you know what I mean? For me, it was that different. And
Right.
no disrespect to Fox, because, they had a couple big hits and all that madness. But I said, what can I do to do my own thing? And now I got discovered by George Clinton and Bootsy Collins. So I was really getting exposed to funk music, but they weren't letting me play funk. They were letting me play rock because I was really into Steve Stevens. I tell Steve Stevens this all the time. That Rebel Yell album came out. It became, other than Edward Van Halen, Steve Stevens became my biggest influence because he found a way to take alternative music
Yeah.
and bring the heavy guitar back. You know, for a long time, it was like, they sounded like shitty players, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, especially in the second coming of punk rock, everybody's just staring at their shoe and they sucked. And all that, that shit was bullshit. Steve Stevens was a virtuoso, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
when you listen to what he found a way to put 4-bar solos and 8-bar solos into an alternative song that could be on KROQ or 91X and not the metal stations, but it still worked for the metal kids. And
Yeah.
to me, that was like a goal. So I thought, I'm going to try to play funky music with Marshall amps. That was like my thing in 1985. This one, I'm going to try to develop this funk rock sort of thing that I want to try.
Yeah.
And that became my shtick, so to speak.
Yeah. That's the one thing that maybe is missing these days, is that it's really a challenge for younger players to go back and get all the diverse mix of things, because there's so much to choose from, and they kind of get pigeonholed into like one thing, and they don't realize that there's a through line from all this stuff that just informs your playing. If you have One Nation Under a Groove by Parliament Funkadelic, and you have Exile on Main Street, and then you put in something, there's a lot to draw from those two seemingly different sides of the street.
They're really not that different.
Right. Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mick and Keith are going into their version of R&B and black music.
Yeah.
And coming up, you know, a perfect example would be, okay, my first band I joined, this is after Was Not Was went #1, and I did Bill and Ted and all that other shit. I got my first big break with Andy Taylor, but Andy, when he quit Duran Duran, but he fired me right before the Psychedelic First tour. But luckily he had the same manager as Rod Stewart, and then Rod put me in his band, and that changed my whole life. And one day with Rod, literally, you know, you had to play like the Faces, and you had to also play like what Jeff Beck was playing in later on in the 80s. And you also had, then he used the Power Station, which was my favorite band, with Bernard Edwards and Carmine Rojas and Eddie Martinez and those guys on the stuff in the late 80s.
Yeah.
And I did all that shit, but except the hard part for me was, Maggie May and You Wear It Well and all that stuff. But I loved those songs so much, and I just couldn't understand. All of a sudden, there'd be a fiddle, there'd be a violin in the music, and I was just literally talking about this song to my friend Marty McGuire. She's in the Chicks. They used to be called the Dixie Chicks, and she plays a violin. I'm talking about songs and the fiddle and the violin, and this song in particular. I asked Rod Stewart, "What the hell were you doing putting a fiddle? I mean, you're a rock and roll singer in the Faces, and drinking." And Rod told me when he did Maggie May and he did You Wear It Well, and songs like doodle I can't remember the name of it right now. Mandolin Wind.
Oh yeah.
He was trying to make a country record.
Oh.
He wanted to make a country record, and so the Stones with Exile are messing around with R&B like a motherfucker, right? And they come up with a hybrid of this, whatever the hell you call it. It's got this swag in it, it's funky, and that's how great music becomes. I mean, come on, you don't tell me that Miss You and ooh, 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 they were trying to make disco music, man.
Right.
And they ended up making this insane hybrid bitchin' rock music that you could dance to. And so for young kids today, if they could listen to these things and isolate, instead of be just copy them, but take the things they like and figure out how to do their own variation. It's how I learned how to play guitar. I would watch a kid play it at a high school dance or something, and by the time I got home and tried to figure out what he was doing, I screwed it up so bad, but it became something new and original, as opposed to me being completely like, let me learn it exactly note for note. I can't even play my own shit note for note, these days,
Yeah, I think that's the thing that's missing in the world of like YouTube and instructional stuff, is that it takes some of the guesswork out. Here's exactly how you played it, but some of the coolest stuff is what comes out of playing something wrong or playing something that you thought was. It leads you into your own style,
It's how you came up with it
exactly.
is to me the interesting thing. Okay, let's look at. I'll tell you. So I get a call one day from one of my oldest pals. We both were playing in our own bands in 1985 at Madame Wong's in LA, trying to make it. We were kids, you know, Robert Trujillo and myself. We were all Gilby Clark. All of us guys were in Hollywood, all trying to make it in the mid 80s. And one day, you know, now Robert's in Metallica, and I get a call. I run into him, and I don't know what it was, but somebody calls me, "Hey, could you help me? I got this band called Mass Mental, and I'm going to go play Lollapalooza and a bunch of stuff. And we've never had a guitar player, but I think, you know, you can." He knew I could play because they'd play Ohio Players and do all the skateboard music, which I was skateboarded my whole life and I surfed my whole life. But then they go into a whole set of Sabbath. So now it's like it's the 2000s, right? And I'm like, and the way I used to learn how to play like Aerosmith songs and all this shit is like, you know, like everybody else, I put the record on, drop the needle, listen and drop the needle, and listen, drop the needle. Well, then all of a sudden I'm trying to relearn all these ancient Sabbath songs that I grew up loving as a kid. And I go, oh, YouTube. I forgot all about it. So I went on YouTube and I watched the guy, like, how do you play blah, 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 you know, how to play Fairies Wear Boots with guitar. And I flip it on, and like 5 out of 5 guys all played it differently, and most of them all played it wrong. But I found that it made it so easy for me to figure out by listening and kind of seeing what they were doing, even if they're doing it wrong, to figure out what I needed to do. And I was able to learn it really fast. So I think young players have a big advantage that they can learn shit. That's why some of these guys can play so good on, like, you can do all those weird scales and all that shit, because they can watch a guy and take that shortcut. And it's really it's a great thing, I guess. But it doesn't teach you intention, and it doesn't teach you when to use it, and it doesn't teach you how to feel it, you know, or get the tone that you can feel it with, a tone that vibrates with the earth, you know. But that YouTube thing really worked great for me. And also the other thing I thought about, we talk about the mixture of black music and rock music, and it's not that far apart. The Stones trying to do black music, and it creates this weird rock. Well, think about Black Sabbath, okay? Think about Sweet Leaf, okay?
Yeah.
The riff is right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now in the 80s, all these 80s drummers that learned how to play drums by fucking around with a Linn drum all day long. Played it like boom, 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 boom. They play it like the drums like it's guitar. And that was the 80s things that sucked. But when you listen to Bill Ward, right? That's the drummer. He's playing a hip hop beat. Okay, the riff is and he's going, and look at, I can bounce to that. It's a hip hop beat. Before there was hip hop was built off those old metal beats and Bonham. So I mean, he's not playing the riff on the drums, right? And in the 80s, dudes all started playing the riff on the drums, and that's when the shit got corny.
Yeah. And it's funny because sometimes whether it's drums or guitar, it's like when you take what you think something is, like the heaviness, you realize that Bonham and Bill Ward and a lot of those guys in Birmingham were really into the Motown drummers. You know, that Jabo and Clyde.
And the bass players.
So it was coming from a whole different thing. If you miss out, if you don't get the R&B or even the New Orleans thing, the second line feel on some of the stuff, like the Purdy shuffle that Bonham does on Fool in the Rain, you know, all those things, that's why listening to so much stuff and always being a student of the instrument is going to yield much greater things than just lopping the top off the mountain.
You're saying exactly what I said about 5 minutes ago about listening to these other things, trying to figure it out. And by the time you figure it out, you've created something in your own original music, right? You know, I mean, you can't tell me that John Paul Jones isn't just doing James Jamerson bass lines all over Led Zeppelin. I mean, that's, you know what I mean? Come on, you're right. That's straight up Motown. Now it's weird. Recently, the last gig I took, Wayne Kramer called me from the MC5, and I've known Wayne for a long time, and Wayne's a good friend of mine, and Wayne was in my film Rumble. And Wayne says, you know, I'm going back out with the MC5. I'm doing an album with Bob Ezrin. Would you come and play with me? And I'm like, yeah, of course. And I think that everybody just assumes the MC5 is just pure aggression. They're known for being really the architects of punk rock.
Right.
But I listened to it and I'm like, what the hell were you doing here, Wayne? Wayne and I turned around and we got the original masters. And we'd sit in the studio with two guitars because I wanted to hear what he was doing and I wanted to hear what Fred Sonic Smith was doing. And I said to Wayne, I go, you guys trying to be you guys are trying to be an R&B band or a dance band? He goes, well, fuck, we were trying to be a dance band and we didn't know what we were doing. And we invented punk rock. It's kind of what happened because they were into Motown. They're in Detroit and, they're pushing and they're pulling and they're swinging. And that's what created that sound, was them trying to do something else completely different and stumbling. Their interpretation of it became some new original shit. Right. Yeah. So that to me is what a lot of kids are missing these days. They become more an exact clone of what they love. There's a difference between influence and straight imitation.
Imitation, right. And everything's put on the grid. Every musician has their own time feel, playing a little bit ahead of the beat and a little bit behind the beat. And then there's band feel, like when you get all those people together, then it creates a compound time, pushing and pulling. And if all those things if you can gel that way, that's where the magic starts. But everything on the grid, everything quantized, is just it sucks the soul right out of the thing.
I know. And there's a fine line with that. If you put, I have a song called Tell Your Story Walking. It's over the years, it just becomes bigger and bigger, and it goes bam, bam, I was born my daddy's son. And like all these bands in Europe and Asia and all these places cover it. And they sort of miss what the song's supposed to really sound like. And I can tell if they're metal guys, they do it one way. And if they're Japanese punk rockers, they do it a different way. What I was trying to do, I was doing James Brown, Sex Machines. Do 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 do. That's Bootsy's bass line. Do 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 do. Okay, so my Tell Your Story Walking. Do 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 do. It's like it's like another James Brown song called Soul Power. Do 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 do. That's what Tell Your Story Walking's based on. And then I put the funky guitar in there, but then I put these chords, down, 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 and I was trying to do Angus Young. I was doing chords like Angus Young. So I was creating this hybrid of a rock song that was funky that the girls could dance to. And if I put it on the grid now, if I bring up the 2-inch, I am so fucking off the grid. I am so off. I am not. I mean, I used to click track with Brian Tishy on drums. We used to click track, and it's still pushing and pulling and all over. So the grid and the drum machine, I think, has ruined a lot of music. Yeah. Nobody's going to tell me, hey, Tell Your Story Walking's all over the fucking place. They're not going to say that. Same with Born to Mac or any of those songs. But they are not going to lock on a grid. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah. Well, that's where all the sexiness and the thing of you were trying to create a feeling, a vibe, and you just can't get that if everything is just, it's got to have organic push and pull,
It's becomes sterile, right? It becomes very sterile. And sometimes a lot of hits are sterile. And that's probably why I've never been really successful. I think that I was able to have a recording contract for like 30 years. I always had someone giving me a big budget because I think I made records that were cool, that sold someplace on the planet. Always, I got a gold album in this weird country or something weird, but never truly successful. But the records were cool and they were influential, and someone would always give me a record deal because of that, even though I didn't have hits. But I think that's why, because I was pushing the boundaries. Chris Blackwell once said, when I was signed to Island Records, he says, I have to sign Grace Jones, and she's going to do something weird, and I may lose money, but that weird record she makes is going to probably influence a band like U2, which is going to make millions.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you need those people that are going out on the very limb of things. I think, and you probably heard this from Bowie himself, but Bowie used to say, when you're to the point of when you're out so deep in it that you can't touch the bottom, you're just starting to get to where you're going to make something interesting. But if if you're familiar and you can feel the bottom of the lake, so to speak, the ocean, you're
safety net. It's
go
safe.
further.
You're getting that. you're playing it too safe. Exactly what he's saying is don't be, if you want to really get, people try to get deep, but they stay into the shallow end of the pool. And you got to get deep. You got to get in. You got to take a chance on drowning big time, but Bowie, when you got a voice like his, for one thing, is insane. But the other thing is that Bowie would do things. I would talk to some of the guys that were all playing with him over the years, have dinner with Reeves Gabrels and all these guys. And I read things still to this day because I'm a massive Bowie guy, right? I had conversations with Bowie that were just like, I was more of like a little kid, crying at the same time I was pooping in my pants. I just, making sure everybody saw Bowie was talking to me and nobody else, shit like that. Fan shit. But when Bowie, these guys would tell me that they would be playing live and Bowie would never correct them if they were playing the shit wrong. And sometimes I'd go see Bowie live and I'd go like, what's her name's playing the bass all wrong on that shit. And he didn't care, so why should I care? But it would drive me crazy because I love the record so much, right? And that's me as an MD. As a music director, when I music direct a big band, I try to point out what I think are the most important parts. Some MDs will load up a track with all the shit on there. What I try to do is I try to figure out on that record, what is the audience really hearing when they're driving in the car and it's on the radio? Which parts are the ones they really catch? And those are the only parts I try to make sure are in the live show. And I don't worry about the other parts, things like that. So, but Bowie, I mean, he would just, I guess guys could just fucking play it all wrong and he didn't give a shit. Oh, feel free. That differs from me because that shit would drive me crazy a little bit.
Yeah, that sounds like that you have the same sensibilities of somebody like Bob Ezrin, that when he would not only produce albums, but he would be called in to produce shows.
Yeah.
As like the big MD, but also the big producer, whether it be Peter Gabriel or Pink Floyd The Wall, just being able to see an overarching thing and being able to hear all the differences, what flows together, what works together. That's a rare gift for musicians,
Well, I never hung out with musicians, very, very few. I mean, I played baseball. We used to have a Hollywood league, and we were all starving musicians with Gilby and all those guys. And we'd play every Saturday, but I mostly hung out with producers, managers, agents, and surfers. I just recently did the new MC5 album with Bob Ezrin.
Yeah.
And now when you get all old, this is some old rock star shit. It's like, oh, I go to Toronto and I go to the Maple Leafs, the hockey team. I don't even know about hockey, but I get invited to the playoffs and I go to the playoffs and, I got some all access shit backstage in these VIP rooms or whatever. And Bob Ezrin's in the room over there. He wants to see you, hey, so, running into Bob Ezrin backstage at a hockey game. And, this is kind of the shit that when you become old, it becomes your nostalgia. Like, I get to see Bob Ezrin and I want to ask him how he got that guitar sound on School's Out or some shit. Right. You know what I mean? So Ezrin is one of those old school guys that, you when you listen to those old Alice Cooper records, I wonder how the hell did you make that record? It's like the sounds and the way the way they use delays and I don't know, man. That's from all those old school guys. There'll never be anybody like them because new producers aren't like that at all.
Yeah, they came up in a completely different time. Their influences were, in some cases big band stuff, or they had formal training, or in some cases they were like, like Bill Simzik, the guy that did the Eagles records. The guy was like a military background and knew all this. So yeah, it's like those.
Wait, John, did you see the special, that whatever that documentary was on the Eagles? And they talk about when they're making their first couple albums and they'd go work with what's his name who produced Led Zeppelin?
Ed Johns.
Yeah, Andy. Was it Andy or was
Man? It was his brother.
Yeah. Okay. So they go. You're only using 3 mics on the drums or whatever, right? And one of them, what's his name? The drummer guy.
Don Henley.
Fucking hate Don Henley. I'll tell you my Don Henley story another day. It's in my book. I talk about fucking Don Henley. I don't know him personally though, but he says, "What if I want to hear the kick drum louder?" He's like, "Hit it harder." And that's like the classic old school producers in a nutshell,
Yeah, I think the Eagles had a thing of they had aspirations of being Zeppelin and go to London and have a famous Zeppelin producer. But there's a difference between Bonham's style. I mean, other side of the planet between Bonham and Don Henley in terms of the way that they approach the drums. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I'll tell you, when I was young, I got into the Ramones, and I was into Led Zeppelin, and I was really into Montrose,
Oh
and
yeah.
rock candy and all this shit. And and I hated the Eagles, and I was the only guy that hated the Eagles. It's like, hey, I just hated the Eagles. It's like rock, but it wasn't really rocking for me, and didn't have no, I skateboarded and I surfed, and it just didn't fit in my world at all. So then I'm like, I moved to LA in '85. 88 now, I'm kind of a rock star. I've got a full-on recording contract. I'm Rod Stewart's lead guitar player. I got a #1 record with Was Not Was. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures, the biggest film in the fucking country. I mean, I'm fucking on fire. And I get invited to the Academy Awards. I get invited to the Academy Awards after party, this really private one, right? The bitchin' one. I go to this party with the Le Mondrian, and I'm feeling like full of my own shit. I just feel like I'm the fucking man. I'm still 23 years old or 22 or whatever. I meet this girl who's an actress on a big TV show, and she's also was on the cover of Playboy. And back then it was like, oh, rock guitar player with a girl who was a Playboy centerfold, who's an actress. I mean, I'm just picturing in my mind the stereotypes. Going to take her home to San Diego to meet my mom, and everyone around home is going to go, oh my God, you're dating this famous actress, and you're so cool, and blah, blah, blah. And this is all going on in my mind while me and this girl are just mind melting. We're talking. We're ignoring Johnny Depp's walking by, all these people. This is 1989, I think. And all of a sudden, back then she had a beeper. Her beeper goes bing, 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 bing. And she looks at it. She goes, oh, I got to go. And I'm like, what do you mean you got to go? It's like, man, we're like vibing for an hour and a half. I mean, this is like, I'm falling in love, right? Yeah. I'm seeing the whole future right here. And she goes, oh, my boyfriend's coming out to pick me up. And I'm like, your boyfriend? I'm thinking about this. I didn't say that to her, but I'm thinking, boyfriend, what are you talking about? And then I say, who's your boyfriend? I'm thinking, I'm Stevie Salas. I'm the lead guitar player for Rod Stewart. I'm like, who's your boyfriend? Who the hell is he? She goes, Don Henley. And I'm like, I fucking hate Don Henley. It never stopped.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he's a polarizing figure these days in music.
I don't even know the guy. I bet if I met him, I'd like, but I mean, that was just like something about the Eagles and Don Henley, and I don't know. It's my big joke to myself. I crack myself up with it.
Yeah. The interested about the color code thing because it came out in a time of the guitar gunslinger, and it had those elements, but it had the really funky other stuff. That your influences were more apparent, but it was a wonderful hybrid because you couldn't quite put your finger on all the different things.
That's what made me unsuccessful. Radio couldn't figure out what the hell to do with me. But it's weird. The record was humongous in Asia, and it was really, really did well in England and Europe. And over there, I was playing to real alternative audiences. What might have screwed me up, and I'm still not upset with myself for doing it, but my album came out January 25th of 1990, I think it was.
Yeah.
And that day, I went on tour opening for Joe Satriani.
Yeah.
Now, I had opened up when I was trying to get a record deal in '87. I got asked to open up 2 Joe Satriani shows, and I had this really funk rock band. It wasn't a trio then. I had a percussion player and all this other shit, 2 girl singers, and we played in San Diego. Two shows at the Bacchanal sold out. I didn't know who Joe Satriani was. I just heard. I had gotten a call from Bill Graham that I was maybe being considered to play guitar with Mick Jagger, but they looked like they were going to get this guy called Joe Satriani, who was like this genius guitar player. And I remember asking Morty Wiggins at Bill Graham who Joe was, and they managed Joe. And he goes, oh, he's just an insane guitar player. So I'm pretty much, I go, well, I'm not going to get that gig. And then I get asked to open for Joe, and I get a standing ovation that night on both shows. People stood up, were cheering for me, and I wasn't signed yet. But I didn't even get to meet Joe. I didn't even meet him. I was just like, whatever. Here it is now, 1990. They want me to go and do the Flying in the Blue Dream tour. I'm thinking, sure, I would just finished a Rod Stewart arena tour in stadiums, and so I'm going to go into theaters with Joe, and it beat me having to go into small clubs. So I thought, let's do it. I'll do it. Then I started to research that every band that opened for Joe had been booed off the stage and never lasted more than maybe 2 weeks max. Where
Wow.
most bands were just getting shit thrown at them. They'd start chanting in the middle of their songs, Joe, 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 Joe. I mean, you're playing. Can you imagine that you're playing your song and everyone starts chanting Joe? This got to be horrible. So now I'm scared shitless. And I'm not really a guitar hero. I don't feel like I'm a guitar hero. I feel like I'm just weird surfer guy who plays this, I mean, I don't know if you ever listened to the first Color Code album. I got the most insane guitar sounds, I think, but he's 69 Marshall that Joe Danzig made me buy. It was 65, Fender Deluxe Reverb all blended with, all this kind of madness of, and I was really into guitar tone and Steve Stevens and all that kind of stuff. So I was into guitar. I was super into it. I was into my own unique, weird style, but this was a whole different animal, and I go on the tour. And so I had just come from doing 20,000 seaters, and about 17,000 of the 20,000 were probably chicks, okay. Now I'm opening for Satch. I'm playing anywhere from 3,500 to 5,000 seaters, sold out. And if there was 5 girls in the crowd, 5, and there was always somebody's girlfriend, you could tell, like the guy would be sitting there staring at your fingers, but the chick would be sitting there just like, doing her nail, like super bored. And every night I'd go on that stage, scared out of my mind that they're going to throw shit at me and boo me. And I was so scared that I worked like I didn't enjoy myself at all because I worked so fucking hard to be great. And I'd get a standing ovation every night. Every night I'd get fucking and I got off that tour and I felt like I had PTSD. It was just so terrifying because I knew that on any given night, if I wasn't absolutely my best, I was going to be fucking horrible. Because Joe Satriani is the most consistent musician I'd ever seen play in my life. I mean, he is just consistent. And Joe couldn't have been more encouraging. He loved me. I'd be playing. I'd see Joe down in a pit watching me play, and he'd be like, man, you did some crazy shit on 2 bullets and a gun and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I did, and what it did was 2 things. One was, I should have been being played on alternative radio like K-Rock and 91X, which I was on 91X, but K-Rock didn't think I was that style of an artist when I really was. But because of Satriani, they thought I was a corporate artist maybe. And that fucked me up for marketing in America. The other thing that it did was positive, though, was it put me on the map as a guitar player because that year, my neighbor was Richie Kotzen. And I remember, Richie's at my house and Guitar World came out and, hey, Rich, look. It's like Richie was number 2 or number 3, and I was number 3, and he was number 2, and Nuno was 1, and I was number 4, or whatever. I don't know, and best new guitarist in the world kind of shit. Yeah. And I was like, wow, because that was a dream too, John. I wanted to be one of those guys.
Yeah.
But to be one of those guys, it took me out of the market that was probably meant for me, so as an artist.
Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I remember the period of time very well. In fact, I probably still have that magazine where it might have been a Guitar for the Practicing Musician or one of the Guitar World. But anyway, I could see where it would be kind of a struggle. You want to be your own person, but if you're putting everything that you've got into it and you're not finding a commercial way for the radio to figure out he's got too many influences, which is an amazing thing for most musicians. We want to hear that, but for
it worked good if you want to play with David Bowie or Mick Jagger or Rod Stewart or somebody, you know what I mean? Which is awesome. But for an artist,
having said that, the fact that you've been able to do both of those is definitely a cake and eat it too scenario where you've seen both sides of it. You may have your predisposition towards one thing or another, but your career has been, people hire you because they're hiring your personality and all that goes with that. You're not just a person that has a very vanilla thing that just slots in there. You've got something that's dynamic, for the live thing, but you also can be in a session where you're bringing ideas that are cool and exciting, but it's not the expected thing because the time you spent with Wayne Kramer or Parliament Funkadelic or Rod Stewart or Jesse Ed David or whoever else. I don't know that you've ever worked with
Yeah.
Jesse Ed, but my point is,
No, but I put him in my film Rumble and made him.
yeah, you've got you're very eclectic, and it's I think that's when the most exciting shit happens. It's just sadly it's hard for people to. There's not a lot of musos out there that want something new and fresh where you can't where you have to, it takes repeated listenings to decipher all the influence, and you go, but that's like an Easter egg hunt. It's like, oh man, I hear a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yeah. Let me tell you something, John.
That's the stuff.
Three things. One is, let's not forget I bombed in America. Okay. Luckily, I couldn't have kept going all these years with the 19 albums I made or whatever.
Yeah.
If not for being humongous in other countries.
Yeah.
And luckily, back then there was no internet, so nobody knew I was, nobody knew I was like. I remember Steve Lukather. I think you just interviewed Steve Lukather before me, right, or something like that, right? So Luke's my pal. But I remember a long time ago, Steve Lukather asked like somebody in our town that's famous, because he lived up the street from me, and I had 500 bands and I had a big old house and I had all this shit. He's like, where's Stevie getting all his money? Is he a drug dealer? And it's like, no. He's like selling out Budokan in Japan and shit like that. So nobody knew because there was no internet, right?
Right.
But let's keep that in mind. I bombed in America, okay? But also, the one thing is that what I find now, and this is what makes me the most proud, a guy like Phil X.
Yes. Yeah.
Fantastic. Will come up to me. Now we're great bros, man. But when I didn't know him, I'd say, like, oh my God, you're Stevie Salas, like, I'm like, what? And he goes, I saw you at Massey Hall. And there was a time, he said this on a TV interview, there was a time where everybody was studying in Canada what Stevie was doing and figuring out what he was doing. And I think to myself, wow, I had no idea, because it would have made me feel a lot better about me failing so miserably in North America, right? If I knew that guys like Phil X were going home and studying what I was doing, and it was actually important to them. Because to this day, people still talk about my, in England, shit, color codes of these cult albums, famous records, and what I do. The thing that really makes me the most proud is that I get letters constantly from kids like, "Hi, I'm 20 years old, and found your song, Born to Mac or Start Again, and these are amazing. I'm learning all your shit." And I'm like, "How old are you?" And I'm like, "That song's older than you." It's like weird. So luckily, the music I didn't make that record that you wish you never made and embarrasses you now, and you don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But maybe if I would have, I could have been more successful in America. So it bothers me that I bombed in America. And the saving grace was that, Mick Jagger calls me and people like that call me. But there's so many times I'm placing people like, who are you? What do you do? And I'm like, fuck off. I don't do anything. You know what I mean? It's like, so I have my pros and cons about these things, but when you guys appreciate that shit I did, that's the real reward for me.
And I think Phil X probably put it properly when we're kind of standing on the shoulders of our heroes, and in a major way, Phil wouldn't be the guy that he is without your influence, and he might be able to name on one hand only who his major guys are, but clearly you're one of them. So,
wow.
So I think that's a beautiful thing. I mean, because now Phil X is a hero to a ton of new players. People love him.
He's a hero to me. He does stuff, and I tell kids all the time, I go, he plays with big boy tone. You know what I mean? It's hard. I talk about this thing called arena tone because I grew up in arenas. I started in sports arenas and stadiums other than my high school band, This Kids in San Diego. And you want to get heard at the back of that arena. You cannot have bedroom tone. A lot of these guys don't have bedroom tone where it sounds huge when you get your ear right in front of the speaker, and it's like, but Phil X has got big boy tone. I mean, it's like, he's one of those guys that doesn't need a stomp box. I fucking hate that. That pisses me off because it's like, I need stomp boxes.
When he plugs that famous SG into a little Spark amp with no effects on it,
Yeah.
And his fucking tone is amazing. And
Yeah.
he's got the right hand from hell. That
All right.
bouzouki,
Yeah.
playing the bouzouki just really sharpened his skills.
Growing up in a Greek restaurant had its benefits for him.
Yeah. And conversely, if he never picked up the instrument and you just happened to meet him, you would walk away and go, what a great human being. He's such a
Oh,
cool guy. Just a
the best.
lovely, lovely guy.
It's the best. I love. I just talked to Phil this morning because him and I are going to Mannheim, Germany, in a couple of weeks or so for this thing, and we're landing almost at the same time. So we're going to just drive together and from Frankfurt over to where we're going for this thing and hang out. And I'm going to get to spend some time with him. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
First time, you know how I met Phil?
No,
Did I tell you last time
I don't think so.
when I was music director and a consultant for American Idol, 2006 to 2010.
Yeah.
And by then I could smell the writing on the wall that the music business was changing drastically and coming to an end. And I would have never worked for American Idol when it started in 2000 or whenever it was. There's no way. Because Mick Jagger's not going to call the guy that works at American Idol.
Right.
But by the time 2006 rolled around, the writing was on the wall. It was the biggest show in the world. A guy I worked with, I used to belong to the surf club in Hollywood. I was the only musician. It was all major agents, managers, and record company executives, and I was the only musician in the group. That we would travel around the world and go surf Hawaii and Costa Rica and all these places, and hang out. And then when things would happen, we'd call each other. We used each other for, hey, I need to know about this. And so Sterling McElwain, who was managing Hanson and working with Dave Matthews Band or something like that, calls me. He goes, hey, I got a call about going in and working at Idol. If I do it, will you come and help me? Because there's a new kid called Daughtry, and I'm going to need your help on him as a music director. And I'm like, yeah. So of course. And so I went and I got the Daughtry. I started listening to the show. Wasn't over yet. When you start to work at 19 Entertainment, which was the management company for American Idol, Simon Fuller's company, I could pop down on set and I'd watch who was doing what was going on. And then Ian Peary was kind of running the office, and we'd start sitting around and planning. Where's this guy live? Where's Daughtry going to live? What is his market? What is the sound? Who should produce them? How are the songs? You get into all these details about very deeply on how you're going to present this artist to the world. And I was a part of all that when I was there. That was part of my job as a consultant at American Idol as well. And I got the record. I'm like, damn, who's this guitar player, man? This fucking guy's good. And it's some guy called Phil X. And I'm like, okay, who the fuck is Phil X? I think I heard he had played with Tommy Lee. Maybe I saw his name or something, Methods of Mayhem or something. I guess fucking guy's good. And so I start putting Daughtry's band together, and I'm hiring and auditioning musicians with Chris. And I'm going through it all, and I'm also learning all these parts. And some of them are pretty, they were out there, man. These weird things Phil does with the E string and harmonics, but I kind of figuring it out. And Daughtry's like, oh my God, I can't believe you can play that shit. Because Phil X is a god. And I'm trying to teach the band this shit. And I go, fuck this. I'm just going to call Phil X and I'm going to ask him to come down to SIR and help me for a day, teaching some of these parts to these two kids I hired to play guitar. Right. That are, brand new kids. And so I call him up. I get his number from the Idol office. And I go, hey, Phil X, hi, my name is Stevie Salas. And he gets all geeked up. Okay. No way. Stevie Salas is calling me? And I'm like, what? You know me? And that's when he tells me, yeah. So he comes down to see me, and he told me he was kind of nervous. And I was like, what? Are you crazy? And so X and me just instantly become the best of fucking friends, right? Because he's so badass. And he started helping me with Daughtry, and that's how we started my relationship with him. It's just a person that I truly, truly love to be around, and I love to watch him play. He makes me play better because we play together a lot. And when you play with him, he will embarrass you. He will make an ass out of you unless you're really ready to fucking play. He will make you look silly. And so I like that. I'm a competitive guy, and it makes me have to try to be great and not just pretend I'm great,
Yeah. I get to meet him for the first time at the Joe Satriani G4 clinic, and I lost his contact information, but his band rehearses in, or not his band, but Kurt Dimer's band rehearses in Cincinnati, and so does my Pink Floyd tribute group. So I was supposed to do a meet up with him and do a in-person interview, but I don't have his contact information anymore. This has been a year ago.
I'll give it to you. I talked to him this morning.
Yeah, but yeah, but what is, I love what you're saying about the fact that he makes you want to play better. We need that in the guys that we play with, to be inspired and to in a nice, friendly, competitive way. You know, nobody's the best. You know, you
No.
can be great, but just trying to get better and trying to grow and having fun, and that's the musical currency that's really the most valuable.
Oh, I love my friends, but I want to kick their fucking ass every time I play with them. I want to spank them, and I don't like it, but when I get my ass kicked too, it's good for me. It's really good for me. So I like being competitive. I'm a very competitive person.
Yeah.
And that means if I want to be competitive, it's because I respect the shit out of them so much. You know, it's
Right.
like, but what I don't want to do, and I never do, because it's too, I'm too busy trying to be a cool surfer, Native American, hip dude, you know, likes, you know, punk rock or whatever. I don't do that thing where everyone gets on stage and the guy goes wheedly 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 wheedly, and then he looks at you and you're supposed to go wheedly wheedly wheedly. Man, I fucking hate that cornball shit. I fucking hate it. I want to play fucking songs. You know, I want to play, you know, Philix and I did this thing with Matt Sorm and Geezer Butler, and we were doing Sabbath songs.
Yeah.
And me and Phil said, we're going to blow the crowd away and not let anyone know. We went in the back room and I came up with this solo. Come on, let's do this. And we did this thing where we started the solo of the song in unison, and then Phil can do all the harmonies. And then we figured out each note, Phil would do the harmonies, and then we didn't tell anybody. So then we go, we're playing, and all of a sudden we play this thing, and the crowd's like, what the fuck? How did you guys, you know, when did you figure that shit out? And we go like, we just kind of did it. But, you know, we were in a back room working on it just to shock it. You know?
No, you don't want to. Yeah, the sleight of hand is the best. Where it's, you know,
Cheap parlor tricks work great. Cheap parlor tricks are great.
well, you know, this format is just fantastic because it's like we've touched on all these really cool bases that we didn't get to the first time, and I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. But yeah, this is
okay. Hold on, I'm going to tell you something now. Okay, just so people know out there, in case I ever die one day or whatever. And I don't. Okay, you saw first Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure record, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Did I tell you before how that came to be?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was a staff producer for David Kirschbaum in 1987, before I was in Rod Stewart or any of that shit. And I was doing all kinds of stuff there, movie soundtrack things for him, hip hop music, shit like that. Because I was the only guy in LA, it seemed like, that was a rock and roll guy that knew about hip hop then. And they called it rap music back then. It wasn't called hip hop. You know, because like Dr. Dre was still in Compton, you know, with the LA Dream Team and stuff like that. But none of the rock guys really knew about that shit. And I did, because I loved Run DMC and Eddie Martinez. But David Kirschbaum says one day, hey, there's this movie that's coming out. I need you. It's a movie about these two guys who are dreamed to be famous guitar players, and they don't really know how to play. But it's really about guitar. And they realized, you know, Stephen Herrick, the director, it was only a second movie. They realized that they did a score to it, and there's no guitar anywhere in the score. And I go, really? Okay, whatever. I don't know. I'll do it, David. I want a job. I get, you know, I was making money. Huh? And I go down, I start to watch the cut of the movie, and I think it's a crappy movie. I think it's really crappy, actually. I don't really get it. But I start sitting with their director, Stephen Herrick, and I start they had like a Led Zeppelin song on the soundtrack they couldn't pay for because it was a small budget movie, things like that. So I would recreate songs while I scored the film. So like a song would be like Misty Mountain Hop. So I'd write a song with the same tempo and same sort of vibe, but I'd change the riff around and make it feel just like that. So it made the scenes still work. And I went through the whole movie and added a ton of that shit. They had a Robbie Robb song called In Time that was I think it's in the scene of Fee Waybill and Martha Davis. They're all in this like outer space Cone of Silence or some shit. I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
And originally they wanted U2. Nobody could afford U2. So on that song In Time, I took my guitar and I plugged it into a Rocktron Pro Gap Direct on the API Power Track Studio, and I put on my delay and I just went and I just put one of those edge all through the whole song.
Yeah.
That song got cut away, and it's if you go online, you go Robbie Rob, In Time, Bill and Ted, Stevie Salas. That is the biggest. The song didn't do well at all anywhere in the world, but that version of the song was peeled off because it's not available anywhere but the movie, and it became this giant cult song. Okay, so I do that. Now comes time to do Keanu and Alex Winter's parts. Okay, now I don't know if you remember the movie. They're in the garage. They got their jam room, right? And they don't know how to play at all. So I go to score that. And everything I did, you know, I'm not trying to be an egotistical person. So I'm watching these and I'm thinking of them as two kids, and they really suck. Okay, so I'm trying to suck.
Yeah.
But I feel like everything I'm doing sounds like a pompous asshole pretending to be shitty, like that's how I saw myself. And I'm sure it wasn't that way, but that's how I saw myself. And I felt ashamed of myself. Like, I don't want to be some fucking pompous asshole guitar player who's I'll pretend to be shitty. And everything I did sounded like that in my mind. So finally, I got this idea. I took the Hamer guitar that Joel Danzig had sent me that I didn't get to use on the Andy Taylor tour because he fired me. And I turned it upside down and I played it upside down, left-handed. So I was trying to play D chords, E chord, and everything's upside down. And I'm hitting the whammy bar, and it sounds horrible, like a guy who doesn't know how to play. And so I felt like I really, as a film scorer, it's one of my favorite moments because it sounds so real to me when Keanu and Alex or Bill and Ted are jumping around in that jam room and they fucking play. I turned the guitar upside down and played it left-handed. That's how I scored those scenes. Okay.
That's brilliant.
Okay. Now here's the last thing about the movie, because that is all anyone ever talks about. The end guitar solo.
Yeah.
You know, that George Carlin's guitar solo.
Yeah.
Well, that wasn't in the movie, and that wasn't in the script. So the movie's done. I forget about the movie. I'm off to other shit. And I get David Kirschman comes up to me in the studio at Power Tracks. He goes, "Hey, you know, they called me, and the end of the movie's not testing well, and it's getting ready to come out, but nobody likes the ending. So I need you to go down to this house in the Palisades, and we're going to put some kind of weird guitar thing on in the end." And I go, "What?" He goes, "We have no idea. There's no script for it or anything. I don't know." So I drive my car to the Palisades, and they have somebody's garage open, and they got the telephone booth in there, and you know, it's all made up. You know, the art director made it all up to look like the set of Bill and Ted, and it's in someone's garage. And there's George Carlin, Keanu Reeves, Alex Winter, and myself, and a couple of the female actresses. And they shoot this whole new ending, and I got to share the trailer with George Carlin. They put me in there, George Carlin, and it was the greatest night of my life. George Carlin and I talked all night, and he told me the most amazing stories. But still, I don't know what I'm going to do. So it comes time to do what I got to do. Well, you know, he brings out the two Steinberger guitars, and they go, oh, Rufus, do you play? And he goes, well, just a little. And he goes, you mind if I play a little, or some shit like that, right? And then they cut to me, and me and George Carlin are dressed in the exact same outfits, okay? And they're going to shoot me from the neck down and George from the neck up. And I stand on a crate, okay? And Keanu and Alex and the two girls are standing right in front of me, staring at me like they're just looking up at me. And I'm standing there, and the big camera's right here. I'm a kid, keep in mind. This whole thing's like, this is fucking crazy. And I go to Stephen Herrick, what do you want me to do? And he goes, I don't know. He goes, just do something wild. So it's a comedy. So the first thing I do is I start off with the A chord of Eruption. But there's no sound. I'm not plugged in. And I start playing air guitar. I'm playing air guitar. and I'm moving my hands like that because I think it looks ridiculous and unrealistic and it might be funny. I'm trying to do comedy, okay? So I do all this shit, and then they short George Carlin. He's like making the faces, and they shoot that, and we're done for the night. And the next day, a couple days later, I got to go to Power Tracks, and I got to score what I did. So I plug in the Rocktron Pro Gap again, direct. Plug in the Hamer telly, the red telly, Joe Danzig gave me, and I just watch my hands on the screen. I start with the A chord, eruption, and then I just played, and my fingers went here, I went there, my fingers went up, I went up, I went up. I just followed what I was doing, not listening to the music at all, just literally trying to be silly. Right. Okay, trying to be silly, trying to be funny. No idea what I'm playing. Comes out, the movie's insane. Stevie Salas is a god, guitar god, all the madness, Satriani tour, Bill and Ted, Rod Stewart, Was Not Was is number one, blah, blah, blah. I got driving my Porsche, I'm buying a new Mercedes, buy another house. But I think everything's bullshit. I think this whole world is full of shit. Everybody's full of shit because this shit sucks is what I did. And I think it's a big joke, and I'm part of the joke, and I'm not buying in, but I'm enjoying the money, and I'm liking the fame and the notoriety. Well, it comes all these years later, okay? Years later. Another Bill and Ted comes out, and all of a sudden there's me, and there's Steve Vai. Steve Vai gets to be the guitar player this time. They didn't call me, they called Steve Vai this time. That's the new hot guitar player in Bill and Ted 2. So Bill and Ted 3 comes out, and all of a sudden there I am again. I saw Keanu Reeves, I don't know, a few months ago, and I was like, Keanu, it's like, I did some pretty amazing things with, guys like Jagger and stuff like that. But when I die, on my tombstone, it's probably going to say he's the guy that did Bill and Ted. And I'm going to start laughing, And I go, I all of a sudden there I am again. I'm all over the place. Bill and Ted 3, and there's Stevie Salas, Steve Vai. Now this guy called Tobin Abasi or something like that. I don't know who he is. And he's the new guy they got. So this thing became part of the franchise, this guitar solo thing. It's just an important part of the franchise, but it was never it was never in the script. So I actually had something to do with making that part of this movie and an iconic thing for everybody else down the line, right? Which is like crazy that I would have that. You know what I mean? Okay, so now last thought about it. I'm in a bar in Soho in London, and I'm having a margarita in the afternoon, and it's 2010 or some shit, and I'm with Jimmy Dunlap. Jim Dunlap, everybody plays Jim Dunlap picks, and Jimmy Dunlap. Jimmy Dunlap was like my brother. He used to be my bodyguard in the early 90s. So Jimmy and I were sitting at a bar at 1 in the afternoon, having a cocktail. And these kids walk up to me. You can tell they were all musicians. They had that look, like that rock and roll look, the whole thing. And they kept looking at me through the window, and they came in and they're looking at me, and they're like, "Are you Stevie Salas?" And I'm like, "Yeah. That's me." And they go, we go to the Conservatory of Music, blah, 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 here in London. And this year's guitar class theses or some shit like that, because I never went to school, was all based on analyzation of your solo for Bill and Ted. And I'm like, oh, really? Well, tell me about it. Tell me about it. Well, they talk about it. You go from pentatonic into a mixolydian, into a whatever. I don't know. I never took a lesson. You took a minor cloud at 13, and you went down to a whatever. I don't know, all this shit. They figured it all out. And I did not have the heart to tell them I played air guitar. I was just doing air guitar. I was just moving my fingers. I was just moving my hands. I wasn't even playing really. I was playing, but I wasn't. Right. And they really think that I worked up this work of amazing technicality of art. And I just was fucking playing air guitar. And it just shows you, though, that maybe the angels and the gods are on your shoulder, and you just better shut up, because they helped me become fucking famous for that. And really, I am not going to make fun of that, and I'm not going to say that everyone's stupid. I'm going to say I'm stupid. I was too stupid enough to understand that maybe I was channeling something that was way bigger than my own little mind could conceive. Yeah. And it's people like crazy, and they're not bullshit. I'm bullshit, because I am too stupid to understand. I just let it fly, and it happened, and I'm going to be thankful and grateful, and I'm not going to say it's all bullshit, because come on, I was playing air guitar, but something went on there and it moved people in a certain weird, crazy way. So, I'm just grateful.
Thank you, man. You're too kind. It's always
Thanks,
nice to meet your heroes.
Hey, man, I love that, man. Thank you. Thank you so much. You have a great day, buddy. Stay in touch.
All right, see you soon.
Thank you for tuning in to the Guitar Hang Podcast, conversations with noteworthy guitar players from around the world. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications to stay updated on our latest episodes.